So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about, I'm going to make sure that I can make this work, performance management. So immediately, you guys probably have a little cringe at the back of your bodies to sort of say performance management, ooh, micromanaging. That's totally not what this is about. It's about how you're able to map your goals onto your long-term impacts and really see how the work relates to your ultimate goals. And also how you can use this to change behavior. As we see that science is moving towards more team science and open science, it's really a shift in how people are used to working and how do you navigate that and how do you work with your partners to be able to drive those types of changes, and performance management is a way that you can actually do that both in the broader picture but also in terms of your own personal goals. So before I get too far into this, we're going to start with a little bit of audience participation. You guys have been listening to us drone on for a bit now. Why did you become a scientist? So show of hands, is it to be famous? And you can choose more than one answer. To be rich? Not seeing a lot of hands here. Is it because you are a naturally curious person and you wanted to answer some questions? We're seeing a lot of hands go up now. That's great. Or did you become a scientist because you wanted to have an impact, you wanted to improve people's lives, you wanted to make a difference? So that was my primary reason for wanting to become a scientist. So, ultimately, most of you, were driven to become scientists because you were curious and you wanted to do something good in the world. But the reality is that sometimes when you're in the throes of your experiments and your projects, you sort of lose sight of those big goals and you forget about why you became a scientist or why you were really driven to become, to study the brain and understand those diseases and understand how we work. But then you come to a conference like CAN, or maybe you're fortunate enough to have someone who actually lives with the disease or the disorder that you're studying come into your lab, and you're reminded, oh, right, this is why I'm doing all of this. So, you have that renewed sense of purpose and that renewed motivation, and your experiments are running a little bit better for the next little while, and that's what performance management can help do. It can help you remind you of what those long-term goals are. There's a number of different tools that you can use. I'm going to talk about one example today, and I'm going to try not to get too jargony and keep it really relatively simple, but it's really this idea of creating a roadmap. Help you map your path forward to your big picture goals. How is that experiment that you're doing right now, that young lady that Jordan was showing the different colors going into the different tubes, how is that going to lead to making a difference? And what's that pathway to get there? And it actually helps you plan your research studies. I'm going to do this. When I get this result, I'm going to build on that and do the next study. It's useful for communicating the value of your work. I'm doing this because I'm ultimately going to help contribute to knowledge or a new treatment or a new diagnostic or what have you. It's useful to report on your work. Your funding agency wants you to be accountable for the research dollars that you're using. How do you tie that back to something that's going to be meaningful and actually helpful for the funding agency to also promote the work that they're supporting? And it's useful to help seek out partnerships. You sort of like what Jordan was just speaking about, you are a researcher, you're good at doing research, you're good at doing experiments. Once you get that finding, who are you going to partner with to actually make sure that you get to that next level of impact? And creating a roadmap can actually help you do that. So this is where I get a little bit jargony, but I just want to illustrate one example. It's called a logic model. And really, again, it's just this idea of, I'm going to do this, and then this is going to happen, and I'm going to build on it in this way. So the first piece is, what are the inputs? What are the resources that I need to make this project happen or to ultimately achieve this impactful goal? And again, this sort of mimics a lot of the themes that we've heard so far about planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. What are the processes that I'm going to do? What are the tasks that I'm actually going to do in the lab or in my job to actually achieve those goals? What are the outputs? What's going to come out of those experiments or those projects or those activities that I'm doing to actually lead me towards this ultimate impact? And then that's going to feed into larger outcomes. So these are things that happen, maybe over a 5-year term or a 7-year term. What are those short-term results? What am I going to get at the end of my grant? How do I get closer to that impact piece? And then ultimately, what's that long-term goal? At the Ontario Brain Institute, we have a pretty big goal. We want to improve the lives, the brain health of Ontarians, and broader, but Ontarians. So how are we going to get there? What are the things that we're going to do to be able to achieve that goal? So, and I forgot one little piece. The other important piece to mention is that we can't do it alone. So there's that little cloud that sort of happens after the outputs piece. And this is really the idea of, okay, I've taken this as far as I can alone or in my lab. Now I need to partner with other people to make the magic happen. I can't be the sole person responsible for getting a treatment approved by Health Canada for curing Alzheimer's disease, for example. So who are those people that I need to work with? Who are those groups that I need to align with to make sure that some of these changes are happening on a broader scale? So I have an example here that I'm going to just kind of walk through to give you sort of a more practical example. So if you're trying to implement treatment guidelines, and this is something that we've worked with a number of our researchers on, what do you need? You need money to do the research, you need people to do the research, you need time, you need things like project plans, data management plans, all of those pieces. And then the activity or the process is you actually need to do the research. You need to do the research, collect the data, analyze the data, and then what comes out of that is a publication. And so, one approach could be, I'm done. I've published a paper, I've got the guidelines, I put them in the paper, I'm done. But then going back to what Jordan was saying, you can let that sort of filter and disseminate slowly over 42 years, is that what you said, Jordan? 42 years, or you could partner with patient advocacy groups to help them and say, listen, we published this paper, it's based on evidence, we need to work with you, we want to work with you to make sure that these guidelines are being adopted and clinicians are aware of them and patients are aware of them so that they can advocate for the type of care that they should be getting. And that's where you get into those outcome pieces where you have to partner with like-minded organizations to try and drive some of these changes forward. And then looping back to the performance management piece, this is why a logic model can actually be really helpful because it allows you to be accountable to the people who are funding you and to perhaps your supervisor or your institution. It allows you to advocate for more funding. Listen, the work that I'm doing is really important because X, Y, Z. On a more sort of internal, kind of from an internal lab or group perspective, it allows you to learn from your mistakes and learn from your successes so that you can actually see how the process evolved and how you could have improved on it or how you could, I think Kelly was saying, the best, you put out a plan, but you never follow the plan exactly to the T. You need to shift and you need to be flexible along the line. And then also it helps you plan for allocation. Do I need to be allocating some grant funds to a person who can do the knowledge translation? Do I need to be allocating funds to a program or research manager who can help me manage some of these international collaborations? And then the other big piece that we really think is important is having that roadmap, showing that process of how you're going to get to that long-term goal is actually going to help you tell better stories. And that's really, that's the sort of piece that, as Jordan was saying, it makes it more real, it makes it more relevant, it makes it more memorable to the people that you're ultimately trying to work with and also to the people that you're ultimately trying to help. And then as a funding agency, it's also really important to the funders because we are all accountable to our funders, and if we have really great stories from the researchers that we're supporting, it becomes easier for us to advocate on your behalf as well. And then shifting gears a little bit, it also really helps with changing behavior because you can align everyone on that ultimate goal. if you get people to agree on what that ultimate goal is, what's that grand challenge that's going to inspire us all to make a difference, then it allows you to align the different groups towards that goal and make sure that you're all working together, that you're all rowing together. It allows you to streamline activities, be more efficient, seeing how everything fits together logically. You take care of this piece, I'll take care of this piece, we'll work together and we'll get further along the path. And also helps to remove barriers. Sometimes, when you get caught in that experiment or you've got your head down on your bench, you sort of lose sight of that bigger picture goal. And if you can remind people of that ultimate goal, all of a sudden the barrier becomes more of a hurdle to overcome rather than a roadblock that makes you not go forward. And in terms of a practical example here, we're going to talk. I want to talk a little bit about one of OBI's big goals is really about driving that open science and getting researchers to share data. And so, when we initially started out, this was a very novel concept. It wasn't something that was as supported as it is today. So it was really about changing behavior, getting clinicians and research coordinators and graduate students thinking about, okay, all of this data that I've worked so hard to collect, you want me to give it away to someone else to analyze it? And so really working with them to change that dialogue and really open them up to see the opportunities for, you're going to get that recognition, you're going to have that time to analyze your data, but then we also want to make that available because ultimately we are here to change people's lives and we're here to make sure that research has impact. It also helped us remove barriers around things like ethics. Being able to have a conversation with some of the RABs to say, okay, how do we do this? Because this is really what we want to do. We want to make that data available. You're telling us we can't do it for good reasons. So how do we overcome that? How do we find language in the consent form that's going to make it okay for us to do what we ultimately want to do to achieve those goals? And it doesn't happen overnight. And I think Helena is going to talk to us a little bit about relationship management and all of those pieces as well. But it really does, having that ultimate goal, that big picture, and aligning everybody towards that goal helps you achieve better things. So that's it for me.